Hi, I'm Kat, and today I have for you a true crime case, a word in Romanian, and I'll also be doing my makeup at the same time. Just a quick disclaimer, and I do apologize, but I have a blocked nose, so I might sound a bit stuffy or stuffed. Yeah, it's just I have a blocked nose. I guess it's the season with the colds and things. And today's case was actually a suggestion by Ashley, one of my YouTube subscribers. So let's get started with the word, which is K. 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 Well done, guys. You just said keys. Frank Mitchell was an imposing man who prison could not hold. Standing 6 feet tall and weighing over 200 pounds, the 28-year-old mad Axeman broke out of jail 3 times. In 1957, Frank escaped a psychiatric hospital using homemade keys. Later, despite promising he would flee any institution, he was sent to Broadmoor Asylum. True to his word, in 1958 he used an axe and hacksaw to break out, sparking a massive manhunt. After breaking into Edward and Eva Pegg's home, Frank choked and robbed the elderly couple before being captured. In court, it took 6 officers to subdue the raging Frank Mitchell. He was sent to an escape-proof cell in Brixton Prison. However, not even strict monitoring could prevent his later escapes. By 1962, in Dartmoor Prison, Frank had befriended Ronnie and Reggie Cray. After punishment for violence and escape attempts, Frank started thinking about his indefinite sentence. In 1966, Ronnie Cray arranged Frank's escape from his minimal supervision work detail. However, the Crays struggled to control Frank, so they murdered him, dumping his body at sea. With all of the strong evidence, Reggie Cray and his associates were acquitted of the killing. The mad Axeman, who'd broken free from every institution, was betrayed by the Cray gang that he considered his friends. His imposing physicality and defiance could not save him from being used and discarded. His remains were never recovered. The end of the story. No, don't worry. We are just getting started because I have to warn you, this is a very twisted story. Frank Samuel Mitchell, born in 1929, I don't know the exact date of birth, was one of 7 children born into a working class family from Limehouse, East London, England. Frank's crimes started very early on in his life. When he was 9 years old, he stole a bicycle from another child. And check this out, because you don't really hear this nowadays. At 9 years old, after he stole the bike, Frank was taken before a juvenile court and he was actually placed on probation. As an adult, Frank had great physical strength and he was really proud of it. He would show off by lifting a grand piano off the floor or picking up 2 full-grown men, one in each hand. But Frank also had a short temper. And according to Martin Fido, a university professor, true crime writer and broadcaster, Frank had the mind of a child of 13 or under. From the age of 17, Frank was regularly locked up in borstalls, known today as youth detention centers, and he would be also locked up in prisons. He would usually go in for shop breaking and larceny. During a short time of being out of prison, Frank actually got a girlfriend and he fathered a daughter with her, but he never knew that he had a daughter. In prison, Frank was a thorn in the flesh of authority. He would be violent with the guards and the other inmates as well, for which he was punished with the birch and the cat o' nine tails. He was one of the ringleaders in a riot at Rochester Borstal. He slashed a guard across the face and was charged with attempted murder after attacking an inmate he believed had informed on him, but he was later acquitted. In 1955, Frank was diagnosed mentally defective and sent to the Rampton Psychiatric Hospital. 2 years later, he escaped with another inmate and they attacked a man with an iron bar before stealing his clothing and also his money. This was in 1957. They escaped using a series of keys made from bed springs and they managed to make their way to Newark. There, Police Constable Bernard Breeden received reports that they were riding on a motorbike through the town after committing several violent offenses, and so the police constable set up a roadblock. He managed to knock them from the bike as they rode by a level crossing. Frank turned a sawn-off shotgun on PC Breeden, but the policeman disarmed him and arrested both of them. Police Constable Breeden was later presented with the British Empire Medal by the Lord Lieutenant of Nottinghamshire at Newark Town Hall for his actions. PC Breeden, who lived in Worksop, served in the police for 30 years, becoming a sergeant and retiring in 1977. Following his death at the age of 76 in 2001, his wife Elsie told the Post that she remembered the incident involving Frank Mitchell very well. His escape was all over the headlines. Bernard, the police officer, was working that weekend and he went out saying that he would catch them, and he did. He didn't know that Frank had a gun. He believed that he was armed with a hatchet. When he was caught, Frank attacked police with 2 meat cleavers and so he was sent to Broadmoor. But the same story, he escaped again. He broke into a private home and held a married couple hostage with an axe. Hence, he got the nickname the Mad Axeman in the press. He was given a 9-year sentence. He told the judge, "There is not a lock I can't undo. If you send me back to any mental institution, then I promise you I will escape." When he escaped from Broadmoor in Berkshire, he used the key that he had made and a hacksaw to get through the double doors of his dormitory. Armed with an axe, he held elderly couple Edward and Eva Peggs hostage at their home in Workingham. Edward fought with Frank when he broke in the early hours of the morning. He only had his walking stick and Frank choked him almost to unconsciousness before he calmed down and took clothes and their car and fled. He was recaptured on a London-bound coach in Hampshire. At court, he fought 6 police officers and 4 Broadmoor assistants in the courtroom as he screamed, "You are a tough lot together, but on your own, you're yellow." In October 1958, Frank Mitchell was given a life sentence for his attack on Mr. and Mrs. Peggs, and he was sent to Brixton Prison and then to Dartmoor Prison. Frank was sent to Dartmoor Prison in 1962, and surprisingly, whilst he was there, his behavior actually improved. He kept birds and he was transferred to the Honor Party, which was a small group of trustees who were allowed to work outside the prison walls with minimal supervision. He was allowed to roam the moors and feed the wild ponies, and he even visited nearby pubs. On one occasion, he got into a taxi to Oakhampton to buy a bird, and guys, I actually know the name of this bird, but I cannot pronounce it for the life of me. I tried so many times. The governor of the prison promised Frank that if he stayed out of trouble, he would recommend to the Home Office that he is given a release date. 4 years later, however, still with no date, Frank became quite angry. When Frank escaped from Dartmoor Prison more than 55 years ago, it prompted one of the most notorious manhunts of the 20th century. 300 police officers and Royal Marines went on foot to check villages and the moorland surrounding the jail, 15 miles north of Plymouth. A Royal Air Force helicopter searched the winter landscape hoping to find Frank. What the search parties though didn't realize was that they were just too late. Frank's escape on 12th of December 1966 was actually planned in detail by the London gangland bosses Ronnie and Reggie Cray. Frank was taken away by car within minutes of escaping, and he was already on his way to a safe house in London before the alarm was even raised that he escaped. With the search underway, the local residents were warned to stay inside and to lock their doors because Frank Mitchell was 28 years old, 6 foot tall, fighting fit, muscle bound, vicious, ruthless, and a serial robber and escapee. Being all over the news, it soon came to light that Frank had been enjoying privileges whilst serving time at Dartmoor, including regular trips to the pub for a pint. Even though he was known for his extreme violence, certified insane as well, serving time in Rampton High Security Hospital and Broadmoor, he was allowed to work outside the prison. Even with no prospect of parole, Frank somehow convinced Dartmoor prison that he was trustworthy. But other reports suggest that the real reason he had these privileges was because he terrorized and bullied prison officers and other inmates who he treated like servants. The truth is, however, that Frank's freedoms went beyond a few hours of fresh air and work on the moors. Local business owners at Elephant's Nest, Horndon, the Peter Tavy Inn, and the Forest Inn in Hexworthy said that Frank would pop in for a lunchtime drink, slipping away cross country and returning to the rest of the honor party before they were returned behind prison bars in Princetown in the afternoon. There were even rumors that Frank would take women to the hayloft of a local barn. Only a few weeks before his escape, he actually ordered a taxi from the Elephant's Nest to take him to a pet shop in Tavistock where he bought himself a bird. Okay, I'm gonna try this pronunciation, a budgerigger. This would be the same bird pets that his parents had at home in London's East End. By that point, Frank already knew his way around, so when the Cray twins got involved with his escape, it was fairly easy. On that day, the weather was really wet and very misty. The honor party and the single guard on duty retreated to a hut on the moor and didn't go out after lunch. At around 3:30 p.m., Frank was given permission to feed some ponies around half a mile away. Frank went to a road nearby, and from there he was picked up by the Cray's henchmen. When the prison minibus arrived to pick up the party on the moor, 1 hour later, realizing that Frank had gone missing, the hunt for him began. According to reports, 3 Londoners in a grey Rover car were seen in Hexworthy earlier in the day. Police eventually found Frank's prison clothes and a foot-long knife dumped in a lay-by on the A30 at Crockenwell near Exeter, concluding that the local search was pointless. The search was called off within a few days. By then, Frank was watching the coverage of the manhunt for him on TV news in the flat given to him by the Crays. He became friendly with Ronnie Cray when they were both serving time in Wandsworth, and at one time the brothers believed that Frank could be a useful ally. So they helped him escape from Dartmoor to display their power over the authorities, but very soon their men discovered that Frank's strength and his mental state made him very hard to control. While he was held there, Frank wrote to the Daily Mirror and the Times saying that he escaped to bring publicity to his case and because he wasn't given a release date. His parents, Mary and Samuel, were interviewed by the press at their home in Bow. Soon after, Frank vanished and has never been seen since, dead or alive. In 1996, in the TV documentary The Crays Unfinished Business, the gang member Freddie Foreman confessed that he killed Frank Mitchell just a few days after his escape on Reggie and Ronnie's orders. Freddie and an accomplice got Frank in a van and told him that he was going to spend Christmas with Ronnie. Instead, they shot him dead. However, Frank's body was never found. The Crays, their brother Charles, and the 2 other men were cleared of Frank's murder 2 years later. So, you might ask, who were the Crays? Ronald and Reginald Cray were born on 24th of October 1933 in Haggerston, East London, to Charles David Cray, who was a wardrobe dealer, and Violet Annie Lee. They were identical twins, with Reggie being born 10 minutes before Ronnie. Their parents already had 6-year-old Charles James when the twins were born. The other child, Violet, she actually died as an infant. The twins contracted diphtheria when they were 3 years old. The Gray household was mostly run by their mother, who remained the brothers' most important influence during their childhood. Their father was a rag and bone man who really liked drinking, and his work led him to live almost a nomadic lifestyle, traveling all over southern England looking for junk to sell. Even when he was in London, he would be in pubs more often than he would be at home. The Cray twins attended Woodclose School in Brick Lane and then Daniel Street School in Bethnal Green. In 1938, the family moved from Steen Street in Haggerston to 178 Valence Road in Bethnal Green. Violet, their mother, was seen as a celebrity, as quite a celebrity in Bethnal Green, for giving birth and raising a healthy pair of twins at a time when the child mortality rate was high among the British working class. In the interwar period, it was normal that one of the twins born into these families would die before reaching adulthood. So, it was quite unusual that both the Cray twins survived, making their mother the object of admiration in Bethnal Green, which really inflated her ego. There was a feeling in Bethnal Green that the emotional closeness between the twins and their mother felt quite strange and unnatural, and they didn't really like the company of others. Ronnie later said about his childhood that the brothers had their mother and each other, so they never really needed anyone else. Billy Wilshire, one of the Cray's cousins, later said that the twins weren't like other children. The Cray's biographer, John Pearson, said that Violet, their mother, planted the seeds of the malignant narcissism that the twins would show as adults by encouraging them to think of themselves as being extraordinary while spoiling their every whim. During the Second World War, their father deserted from the British Army. He was conscripted in September 1939. After deserting, he spent the next 15 years as a fugitive, being finally arrested in 1954. During this time, he wasn't very much involved in raising his family. At the same time, the twins were evacuated to East House in Hadley, Suffolk, with their mother and their older brother. They stayed in Hadley for around 1 year before going back to London because Violet missed her friends and family. Ronnie later described Hadley as their first time in the countryside, both twins being attracted to the quietness, the peacefulness, the fresh air, nice scenery, which was very different from London. With the influence of their maternal grandfather, Jimmy Cannonball Lee, the Cray twins took up amateur boxing, and they both achieved some success, but Ronnie was considered to be the more aggressive one of the twins, constantly getting into street fights as a teenager. He had a low IQ, but he really liked reading, especially books about T. Lawrence and Al Capone. In March 1952, the Cray twins were called to do national service in the British Army. Even though they reported to the depot of the Royal Fusiliers at the Tower of London, they tried to leave after only a few minutes. When the corporal in charge tried to stop them, he was badly injured by Ronnie when he punched him in the jaw. The brothers were arrested the next morning by police and turned over to the army. In September, while absent without leave, they assaulted a police constable who tried to arrest them. They became among the last prisoners to be held at the Tower of London before being transferred to Shepton Mallet military prison in Somerset for a month to await court-martial. After they were convicted, they were both sent to the Buffs Home Counties Brigade Depot Jail in Canterbury, Kent. But when it became clear that they would be dishonorably discharged from the army, their behavior actually got even worse. They ruled the exercise area outside their one-man cells. They threw tantrums, they emptied a latrine bucket over a sergeant, they dumped a canteen full of hot tea on another guard, they handcuffed yet another guard to their prison bars with a pair of stolen cuffs, and even set their bedding on fire. Eventually, the brothers were moved to a communal cell where they assaulted their guard with a vase and then escaped. After being recaptured, they spent their last night in military custody in Canterbury, drinking cider, eating crisps, and smoking cigarillos, courtesy of the young national servicemen acting as their guards. The next day, the Crays were transferred to a civilian prison to serve their sentence for the crimes they committed while being absent without leave. It seems that prison psychiatrists who examined Ronnie found him to be educationally subnormal, psychopathic, schizophrenic, and insane. Even though they didn't really have a great military career after being released, the Crays developed an extremely militaristic style. Ronnie started calling himself the Colonel, while he would call their home on Valence Road Fort Valence. Because of their criminal records and dishonorable discharges, their boxing career was over, so they turned full-time to crime. They bought a snooker club in Mile End where they started several protection rackets. By the end of the 1950s, the Crays were working for J. Murray from Liverpool and were involved in truck hijacking, armed robbery, and arson. With the money, they bought other clubs and properties. In 1960, Ronnie was in prison for 18 months for running a protection racket. Whilst in prison, Peter Rachman, the head of a landlord operation, sold Reggie a nightclub called Esmeralda's Barn to prevent threats of further extortion. The ownership of Esmeralda's Barn increased the Crays' influence in the West End by making them celebrities and criminals. The twins shaped a standard. Anyone who failed to show due respect would be severely punished. The Cray twins laundered money through dog and horse tracks and through other businesses, which led to other people being investigated during the 1960s for their cooperation with the crimes. The twins were assisted by a banker called Alan Cooper, who wanted protection against the Crays' South London rivals, the Richardson gang. In the 1960s, the Cray twins were seen as prosperous celebrity nightclub owners, and they were part of the swinging London scene. A large part of their fame was due to their genuine legal business activities as popular figures, being photographed by David Bailey and socializing with lords, MPs, socialites, and show business characters, including Frank Sinatra, Peter Sellers, Joan Collins, Judy Garland, Diana Dors, George Raft, Sammy Davis Jr., Shirley Bassey, Liza Minnelli, Cliff Richard, Dusty Springfield, Jay Mansfield, Richard Harris, Danny LaRue, and Barbara Windsor. These were the best years of their lives, and the Cray twins felt untouchable. People perceived the twins as men who rose out of poverty into position of wealth and power thanks to their own efforts. The twins valued their image and actually used the media for this by inviting journalists to take photos of them with other celebrities at nightclubs or when donating to charity. They were obsessed with managing and promoting their image the way that they wanted as donors who gave generously to charity and as men who rose up from poverty to become rich and powerful. In 1960, gambling in clubs became legal in the United Kingdom, which for the first time allowed people who abide by the law to gamble openly outside of betting on horse racing. The Crays were the owners of 4 nightclubs where gambling was allowed, so they were seen as successful businessmen, but they were also able to socialize with people who would have previously rejected the company of gangsters running a gambling den. The Crays promoted a gangster chic image both dressing in a style that a lot of films associated with gangsters, wearing dark suits with tight knotty ties and shoulder padded overcoats, combined with extravagant jewelry such as large gold rings, gold bracelet watches, and diamond cufflinks. The British scholar Ruth Penfold Mounce described the twins as a classic example of the social bandit criminals who became folk heroes because of the belief that they were standing up to a corrupt establishment while also paradoxically being seen as upholding the better part of society's values. The twins were seen in some parts as Robin Hood type criminals whose crimes were deemed acceptable. The Krays made a point of stressing that there were limits to the values they are willing to violate while promoting the image of themselves as the benefactors of society. They made a great point of showing that they were respectful towards women because they knew that the British public didn't like men who were disrespectful towards women. One former member of the firm, Tony Lambrino, stated that the positive image of the Krays was just a myth, maintaining that the only people the brothers ever cared about were themselves. Their image had very little to do with who they actually were, more vicious and selfish than the popular folk hero image they portrayed. Their fans, however, kind of justified their supposed Robin Hood characteristics with the Krays alleged to have given away much of their ill-gotten wealth to the deserving poor of the East End, their respect for women, and as a force for order who engaged only in what were considered socially acceptable crimes such as theft while punishing those who engaged in what were considered socially unacceptable crimes such as rape. In other parts, however, the Krays were seen as symbols of moral decay and evil. They became symbols in the public mind of British organized crime itself, as the brothers were associated with stories of excessive and unnecessary violence at a time when London's criminality appeared more organized than ever before, integrated into the establishment and the popular modern culture. The Krays' close association with the East End, an area viewed as the center of social disorganization and moral decay, further contributed to the negative image of the brothers. There were also suggestions of what was viewed at the time as perverted sexuality. At a time when homosexuality was considered abnormal, especially in the underworld of the East End, Ronnie Kray made a point of flaunting his relationships with men, which was considered to be shocking. Reggie was presumably heterosexual, but he only had one known relationship with a woman and he was briefly married. But there were also rumors that he had boyfriends as a teenager. The nature of their sexuality contributed to their popular image of being in some way very perverse. Police investigated the Krays quite a few times, but their reputation for violence made witnesses afraid to testify against them. During the 1960s, the Kray twins formed an alliance with the Commission, the governing body of the American Mafia. They were in contact with Mayor Lansky and Angelo Bruno, two New York mafiosi who were looking to invest in London's nightclubs and casinos for money laundering. Similar establishment in Havana had served that purpose, but after the Cuban Revolution in 1959 they got closed, so the mafia considered London an alternative. The belief that the Krays were able to influence the British government by blackmailing political figures such as Boothby made them attractive as prospective partners. Boothby was a conservative lord and it was rumored that he and Ronnie had a sexual relationship and Boothby loved being dominated by Ronnie, who was a sexual sadist. The Conservative Party tried really hard to keep this information hidden from the public. On 12 of December 1966, the Krays helped Frank Mitchell to escape from Dartmoor prison. Ronnie had befriended Frank while they served time together in Wandsworth prison. Ronnie thought that he would be doing Frank a favor by getting him out of Dartmoor, highlighting his case in the media and forcing the authorities to act, because he wasn't given the release date. Once Frank had escaped, the Krays held him at a friend's flat in Barking Road, East Ham. But Frank was difficult to control with mental health problems, so he disappeared. But the Krays were acquitted of his murder. Freddie Foreman, friend of the Krays, claimed in his autobiography Respect that he shot Frank Mitchell dead as a favor to the twins and disposed of his body at sea in the English Channel. In October 1967, 4 months after the suicide of his wife Frances, Reggie was allegedly encouraged by his brother to kill Jack the Hat McVitie, a minor member of the Kray gang who had failed to fulfill a £1,000 contract, £500 of which was paid to him in advance to kill their former financial advisor Leslie Payne. Jack was lured to a basement flat in Evering Road, Stoke Newington, on the pretense of a party. When he went inside, he saw Ronnie seated in the front room. Ronnie approached and cut Jack below his eye with a piece of broken glass. It's believed that an argument then broke out between the twins and Jack McVitie. As he got more heated, Reggie pointed a handgun at Jack's head and pulled the trigger twice, but the gun failed to discharge. Jack was then held in a bear hug by the twins' cousin Ronnie Hart, and Reggie was handed a carving knife. He stabbed Jack in the face and stomach, driving the blade into his neck while twisting the knife, not stopping even as Jack lay on the floor dying. Reggie had just committed a very public murder against someone who many members of the firm felt did not deserve to die. Detective Chief Superintendent Leonard Nipper Reid of Scotland Yard was promoted to the murder squad, and his first assignment was to actually bring down the Kray twins. During the first half of 1964, Leonard had been investigating their activities, but publicity and official denials of Ronnie's relationship with Woodbye made the evidence that he collected useless. Leonard went after the twins again in 1967, but he came up against the East End Wall of Silence, which discouraged anyone from giving information to the police. The twins were represented in court by Mimon Lethbridge. By the end of 1967, the detective had built up enough evidence against the Krays. Early in 1968, the Krays employed Alan Bruce Cooper, who sent Paul Elvey to Glasgow to buy explosives for a car bomb. Paul was a radio engineer who put Radio Such on the air in 1964, later renamed Radio City. After police detained him in Scotland, he confessed to being involved in 3 murder attempts. The evidence was weakened by Allen, who claimed that he was an agent for the U.S. Treasury Department investigating links between the American Mafia and the Kray gang. The attempted murders were his attempt to put the blame on the Krays. Eventually, Scotland Yard decided to arrest the Krays on the evidence already collected, in the hope that other witnesses would come forward once the Krays were in custody. On May 8, 1968, the Krays and 15 members of the firm were arrested. Frank Mitchell's escape and disappearance were much harder to obtain evidence for, since the majority of those arrested were not involved with his planned escape and disappearance. The twins' defense under their counsel, John Platt Mills, King's Counsel, consisted of flat denials of all charges and discrediting witnesses by pointing out their criminal past. Justice Melford Stevenson said, "In my view, society has earned a rest from your activities." The trial, which lasted from January to March 1969, was a media sensation. Such was the demand to attend the trial that a black market emerged for seats, with the price being £5 per day for a seat in the public gallery section of the courthouse. It was the longest murder hearing in the history of British criminal justice, during which Justice Melford Stevenson stated of the sentence, "I recommend they should not be less than 30 years." In March 1969, both were sentenced to life imprisonment with a non-parole period of 30 years for the murders of George Cornell and Jack McVitie. Their brother Charlie was imprisoned for 10 years for his part in the murders. Ronnie and Reggie Cray were allowed under police guard to attend the funeral service of their mother Violet on 11th of August 1982, following her death from cancer a week earlier. They were not allowed to attend her burial in the Cray family plot at Chingford Mount Cemetery. To avoid the publicity that surrounded their mother's funeral, the twins did not ask for permission to attend their father's funeral in March 1983. Ronnie Cray was a Category A prisoner, denied almost all liberties, and not allowed to mix with other prisoners. He was eventually certified insane, his paranoid schizophrenia being tempered with constant medication. In 1979, he was committed and lived the remainder of his life in Broadmoor Hospital in Crowthorne, Berkshire. Reggie Cray was locked up in Maidstone Prison for 8 years, Category B prisoner. In 1997, he was transferred to the Category C Wayland Prison in Norfolk. In 1985, officials at Broadmoor Hospital discovered a business card of Ronnie's that led to evidence that the twins from separate institutions were operating Crayley Enterprises, a lucrative bodyguard and protection business for Hollywood stars, together with their older brother Charlie Cray and an accomplice at large. Among their clients was Frank Sinatra, who hired 18 bodyguards from Crayley Enterprises on his visit to the 1985 Wimbledon Championships. Documents released under Freedom of Information laws revealed that although officials were concerned about this operation, they believed that there was no legal basis to shut it down. In his autobiography, My Story, 1994, Ronnie stated he was bisexual and not homosexual. In the 1960s, he also planned to marry a woman named Monica, whom he dated for nearly 3 years. He called her the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. Ronnie was arrested before he had a chance to marry Monica, and although she married his ex-boyfriend, 59 letters sent to her between May and December 1968 when he was imprisoned show that Ronnie still had feelings for her and his love for her was very clear. He referred to her as my little angel and my little doll. She also still had feelings for Ronnie. These letters were actually auctioned in 2010. A letter that Ronnie sent to his mother Violet from prison in 1968 also referred to Monica. If they let me see Monica and put me with Reg, I could not ask for more. Monica is the only girl I have liked in my life. She's a lovely little person, as you know. When you see her, tell her I am in love with her more than ever. Ronnie then married twice, marrying Elaine Milderner in 1985 at Broadmoor Chapel before the couple divorced in 1989. He then married Kate Howard, whom he divorced in 1994. In an interview with author John Pearson, Ronnie indicated that he identified with a 19th century soldier, Charles George Gordon. Gordon was like me, homosexual, and he met his death like a man. When it's time for me to go, I hope I do the same. Reggie married Frances Shea in 1965. She was helping to publicize a film she was making about Ronnie, who had died in the hospital 2 years earlier. The marriage lasted 8 months when she left, although the marriage was never formally dissolved. An inquest came to the conclusion that she had committed suicide, but in 2002, an ex-lover of Reggie Cray's came forward to allege that Frances was murdered by the jealous Ronnie. Bradley Allardyce spent 3 years in Maidstone Prison with Reggie and explained, I was sitting in my cell with Reg, and it was one of those nights where we turned the lights down low and put some nice music on, and sometimes he would reminisce. He would get really deep and open up to me. He suddenly broke down and said, I'm going to tell you something I've only ever told 2 people, and something I've carried around with me, something that had been a black hole since the day he found out. He put his head on my shoulder and told me Ronnie killed Frances. he told Reggie what he had done 2 days after. In 1997, Reggie married Roberta Jones, whom he met while still in prison. The relative rarity of identical twins made the craze stand out, as there were numerous other gangster brother teams in the East End in the 50s and 60s, such as the Richardson brothers, the Nash brothers, the Dixon brothers, the Wood brothers, the Malone brothers, the Webb brothers, and the Lambrino brothers, but only the craze live on in popular memory, with the rest forgotten. Ronnie was pronounced dead on 17th of March 1995 at the age of 61 at Wexham Park Hospital in Slough, Berkshire. He had suffered a heart attack at Broadmoor Hospital 2 days earlier. Reggie was allowed out of prison in handcuffs to attend his brother's funeral. Reggie died from terminal cancer after being released from prison on compassionate grounds, aged 66, on 1st of October 2000. During his incarceration, Reggie Cray became a born-again Christian. He was freed from Wayland on 26th of August 2000 on compassionate grounds on the direction of Home Secretary Jack Straw. He had been diagnosed with bladder cancer earlier that year, and the illness had been declared as terminal. The final weeks of his life were spent with his wife of 3 years, Roberta, in a suite at the Townhouse Hotel at Norwich after he left the Norfolk and Norwich Hospital on 22nd of September 2000. 10 days after his death, he was buried beside his brother Ronnie in Chingford Mount Cemetery. Charlie Cray, Ronnie and Reggie's older brother, was released from prison in 1975 after serving 7 years of his 10-year sentence for his role in their gangland crimes. Charlie was sentenced to 12 years imprisonment in 1997 for conspiracy to smuggle cocaine in an undercover drug sting. He died in prison of natural causes on 4th of April 2000, age 72, with Reggie allowed out of prison to attend his older brother's funeral. Frank Mitchell's body has never been found to this day. Oh, and this, guys, it's a very, very twisted story, right? It's like, what, 3, 4, 5 murder cases into one? What do you guys think? Please do let me know in the comment section down below. For now, take care, stay safe, and thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!